morning. Richard Rubottom from the Salvation Army. We're reading from Revelation 21, starting at verse 6. He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death." One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down from out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. These were the 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, its gates and its walls. The city was laid out like a square, as long as it was wide. He measured the city with the rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length, and as wide and high as it is long. We are now in the portion of Revelation that describes the New Jerusalem, the holy city. Jesus says several times in Revelation, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first or the beginning and the last. And I wrote it up there in Greek. I earlier asked a group of people if they could read that. Some of them could. So doing all this Greek seems to have helped some of them. And I want to emphasize, if you really want to get a good understanding of the Bible, you need to be able to have some knowledge of the original languages. Now, John is told that Jesus will give, doso, and he will give it freely, doreon, the water of life. This word doso, and of course doreon, they're both from the same root. We have this word, it's, remember, most Western languages today are Indo-European, or at least they have an Indo-European background. And so you'll recognize the English word dose, that which a physician gives to a patient. And also there's donor or donate, from the Latin word dono, okay, or dono, excuse me. So again, the idea here is that this water of life will be given freely, no cost, and it will allow people to live eternally. This word means will inherit. Kleronomese. It's the only time that it's used in Revelation, but it's an important word for the simple reason that we are all inheritors of what God is prepared for us and that he will give us. Now the things promised have come to pass. It should be remembered that positive or negative, God always keeps his promises. In Revelation 16:7 and in Revelation 21, the word gegonon, it is done, is used. In 16:7, the wrath of God is done. And you can read Revelation 16:7 for yourself. Now, God's wrath has been promised from the early pages of the book of Genesis. God's wrath is always controlled. He doesn't allow wrath to consume himself. In fact, it is often instructive. In the Gospels, Jesus drives out the money changers from the temple. It says that he overturned the tables of the money changers, but only the seats of those selling doves. You see, the doves were innocent. They had done no wrong, and so they were not harmed. So his wrath was controlled. Then Jesus stated the reason for driving out these people and said it was wrong to make God's house a den of thieves. Now that's a negative example of God's wrath, hopefully with a positive result. And in Revelation 21:6, the making of all things new is done. The wrath of God has fallen on all that would make his world wrong. And now he makes all things right and good. The words of God are faithful and true, and he is the beginning and the end. In Hebrew, there's a statement, and sorry, I've forgotten exactly where it is, but it says that God is the beginning and the end. Rishon is the word for beginning, and Aharon is the word for end. So God is timeless. He lives in the eternal now. And when we are born, we are dead in sin. And it's only when we experience the second birth or have been born again, see John 3, that we can begin to live as God lives. Now, just for a minute, stop and think. We think that we live in time, but we know we don't live in the past. We know we don't live in the future, so we think we live in the present. But exactly when is that? As soon as you think you experience the present, it's in the past. And so I lay this out, that only those who have experienced a second birth have the possibility of beginning to live in the eternal now. And of course, in this blessed kingdom, we will live in the eternal now. There will not be a past or a future, but there will be an eternal now. And that means that every project that we start, every work that we begin, we're going to finish it, no matter how long it might take, because we live in the eternal now. Now, think of this. Jesus says that he will give us this water of life freely. Oxygen is necessary for life. You don't live long without oxygen. But think of water. What is water? H2O. 1 part hydrogen, 2 parts oxygen. And go without water for 3 days and see what happens. It's not good, all right? So water is vitally important to us as is air. And the continuation of life depends upon both of these wonderful things that God has given us. And the water that is promised to believers is more than a material substance. The knowing and learning of God and his ways are as important as air and water to the physical body and to the spiritual body. Now, a response might be that people living without God seem to do quite well. But it must be realized that they are not truly alive. They are not spiritually alive. They are not born of the Spirit. All they have promised to them is the second death. In verse 7, we're told that those who overcome will inherit, and that's that word here, will inherit all this, and that God will be their God, and they will be his son, and he will be my son. It's interesting, this is, John uses the word son here, huios. And normally he uses the word tekna, which means child, but now he's talking about son. So he's talking about a much closer relationship with those whom have trusted Christ than just a simple child. You know, a child can be out there, anybody, we're all children, but a son is someone who has a closer relationship. Now, that is not meant to exclude women by any means. And oftentimes when the New Testament talks about brothers, it uses it in the sense that it's all encompassing. Now, when we overcome, we are conquering. And this is the only place where we're told that we conquer in the New Jerusalem. And it's not that we have anything there to conquer, but the fact that we have conquered. Now, there are three promises of God that are made to Abram. In Genesis 17:7, God says, I will be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And then he makes a promise to David in 2 Samuel 7:14. I will be his father and he will be my son. Now this promise is made to David, but it's about Solomon. And if you'll stop and think a minute, King Saul, who was the first king, had Samuel as his prophet. David had Nathan. Who did Solomon have as a prophet? No, Solomon had God. And what did Solomon do? He turned his back on God for a while. And then the third promise is to us. Revelation 21:7, and I will be their God, and they will be my children or my son. Now verse 6 spoke about thirst and living water, and the thirst for God is satisfied in the reality of the family of God, in being his children. And those who have overcome or conquered over sin will have blessings innumerable. In the letters to the 7 churches, the overcomer will eat of the tree of life, not be hurt by the second death, be given hidden manna and a white stone, receive power over the nations, not have their name blotted from the book of life, be a pillar in the temple of their God, and sit with Christ on his throne. So the means of overcoming, what are they? Well, first of all, the blood of the Lamb, the word of the saints' testimony, and the victory of faith. And of course, these all three can be found in the scriptures. Verse 8 goes on, and some versions have a problem with translating this word, delois, okay? Now this is in the dative, so whenever we translate a Greek word that's in the dative, we say it's either to or for, all right? And so I've translated it to the cowardly. The Authorized Version translates delois as fearful. And I don't think that goes far enough. And so many more recent versions have translated it as cowardly. So I really think cowardly is better. And there's a whole list, and we read those earlier, of people or characteristics that will not be allowed in the holy city. Now, why have a second list? I mean, already we know that Satan, the false prophet, the Antichrist, and all those whose names were not written in the book of life, they've been cast into the lake of fire. So why have this second list when we're talking about the New Jerusalem? Well, sad to say, but this may refer mostly to apostate Christians. those who know the Word or have heard the Word, who've experienced God's presence, but have turned their back on Him. In the parable of the sower, the cowardly would be the rootless ones, the ones who are afraid to speak out, the ones who, when they have the opportunity to witness for Jesus, just don't do it. They hide. They hide in silence. And there are many people today who are doing that. When we choose our own personal safety over commitment to Christ, that puts us in the category of these cowardly ones who will not be allowed into the kingdom. Now, throughout Revelation, deviation from the truth is an evil to be turned away from. The unbelieving have become detestable. And this is the word for having become abominable, menois, sorry, again it's in the dative, but it's also a participle, so it's, participles are translated in English, having, ing words in the translation. So, those who turn away from the truth, when they're confronted with their folly, when they're confronted with a rational debate, say, they frequently become angry and violent. And so this can lead to murder. And then there are the sexually immoral, pornois. These are those who would not control their physical desires. They have chosen a lower base lifestyle rather than the one who gives true love to all who come to him. Early Greek writers used the word pornos to indicate a male prostitute in the various temples. But by New Testament times, pornos had become a term with a more general meaning. And so this is the base for our word pornography and even prostitute to a certain degree. Now, a sorcerer is mentioned. Now, what is a sorcerer? Well, somebody who seeks by magic arts to circumvent God. In 1 Samuel 15:23, we're told that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Now, that doesn't seem to jive. That doesn't seem to fit. But witchcraft is a rebellion. Satan worship is a rebellion. And anything that's practicing the magic arts, the occult arts, is a rebellion because they're trying to circumvent God. And so they will not be allowed in the new kingdom, in the new Jerusalem. And idolaters are essentially those who worship themselves. Now, if you're worshiping yourself, you can't worship God. So, liars. These are people who deceive to attain a goal that's totally self-centered, and it doesn't matter what kind of harm they do to other people. So all of these people have rejected the truth in some fashion, and they reject the one who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if they refuse the truth, or the true one, then the lake of fire is their only option. And I say once again, when you reject the truth, you automatically accept a lie. There is no other recourse for you. And so I can only recommend the truth. The scriptures are still the most reliable source for truth. And that's not popular to say today, but I certainly believe it to be true. Genesis 15:1 says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. Now, we're told that spiritually we're also children of Abram. Thus, this promise is also for us, that God will be our shield and our very great reward. Revelation 22:12 says, look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done. Again, people will say, but that sounds like works. That sounds like you get to heaven by your good deeds. Remember, people ask Jesus, what are the work that we should do to please God? And Jesus said, believe on the one whom he has sent. That's the only good work that will get you into heaven. So trust Christ. Now the Lord God is our reward. And the question is, have you gone to him for salvation? Verse 9 says that there are these 7 messengers, angels, and one of them comes to John and takes him in the spirit to a high mountain. And there's a question here, because we know that the earth has been, as some people might say, terraformed, and it's been made into a more rolling type of topography. And so it would seem that this high mountain is more of a spiritual thing. And John himself says, I was taken in the spirit. Now, by the way, how you would look at this is certainly your own personal viewpoint, but I think this is the spirit. The word spirit is referring to John's spirit and not necessarily to the Holy Spirit. Now, when the angel says to him, Duro, you come here, it's an emphatic imperative. And we don't like imperatives. We don't like to be told what to do. But in this case, that's exactly what John is told. You come here. And you get the impression that the messenger's saying, now. I can remember my parents saying that to me over and over again. You come here now. And my reluctance to do what they said, which always had a consequence, thank God. So this messenger who commands John is most likely the same one who also commands him in Revelation 17:1 to react, to do. Okay. Now. Revelation 17:1 is concerned with the judgment of the unfaithful, the apostates, the church. But Revelation 21:9 is about the faithful overcoming church enjoying the blessings God has prepared for them. Many commentators understand the New Jerusalem in a completely figurative way, a symbolic way. They don't want to understand it literally. And the believers will have to wait and see. I believe that it's there, it's waiting on us, it's going to come down out of heaven, and we will see then exactly what it is. But we need to remember that John's trying to describe something that he has never seen before, and he sees now in a vision, and he's trying to describe it to people who have never seen it. And so, it's like trying to describe color to a person who was blind from birth. It would be extremely difficult. So a major problem with the commentators who believe that nothing could exist outside of their own frame of reference is a problem indeed. There are many things in this world that are in existence that are outside of my frame of reference. And when I learn something about them, I learn something new. And many commentators need to remember that just because it's outside their frame of reference, it's not necessarily out of existence. Now, what is clear is that the New Jerusalem will be a holy community open to all. There is no barrier to keep anyone from going to this wonderful place. The only barrier that will keep them is themselves. And people don't like to hear that, but I sincerely believe it to be the utmost truth. If you don't want to do what God says, then there's no other choice. Now, in the next several verses, the lamb, the word lamb, arnio or arnion, will be prominent. And he'll be mentioned 7 times in the next 22 verses. So as you're reading through Revelation, just keep watching for that. All right. Now, this idea of the mountain. John is carried away in the Spirit. And this being carried away in the Spirit is something that happens frequently in the Bible. And as I said earlier, mountains no longer exist as like Mount Everest. So, but in the past, when people would draw near to God, a mountain is involved. When the law was given on Mount Sinai, when Elijah returned there to be instructed by God, or the Mount of Transfiguration, when God spoke the simple instruction, listen to him. But mountains are no longer necessary to receive God's instruction or his consecration, because God will be with us. And so I put the word Emmanuel down here, Emmanuel. With us is God. And this is it in English, and it's almost exactly the same in Greek, Emmanuel. Emmanuel only has one occurrence in the New Testament, and of course that's earlier on. But I want to emphasize it now, because the only people who will be in this holy city will be those who are consecrated to God. So the Jerusalem coming down from God is the Jerusalem that has always been present with God. Galatians 4:26 says, "But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother, the Jerusalem above." And there's always been a Jerusalem, a tabernacle in heaven. And this is the pattern that God always intended for the human community. Now we go on, and we see that this holy city has a glory and a radiance. Now this is the word for radiance in Greek, phos there. The Greek word for light is phos, so you can see where the word comes from. And it's probably a direct relation to something that we call the Shekinah glory. Now, the word Shekinah does not appear in the Bible, but it's a word that was later used by Jewish commentators and then adopted by Christian writers. And when we think of the light that was with the people in the wilderness by night, and of course the cloud by day, that was the glory of God protecting his people. And so when we think of this glory, this light, not only think of the beauty, but think of the protection. People in ancient times feared the dark. And there are people today who are a little skittish when they're in the dark. We don't, in modern day America, we don't have a lot of dark. For instance, it's very difficult to see the stars, for the simple fact of what they call light pollution. But if you can get out into the country, the night sky is beautiful, but it can also be a little frightening if you're not used to it. So God takes away the dark. Now remember, he did create dark. He didn't create light. Light was always there. God is light, all right? But he did create the light of the dark, and he called it a name. He gave it a name, Lila, okay, in Hebrew. Now, this idea of no more dark may only have to do with the holy city. The sun, the moon may still be able to have an effect on the rest of the world. But in the holy city, no dark. Never any more dark. And for those who might have a fear of the dark, that would be a great thing. We're told that the wall of the city is like jasper, clear as crystal. And if you'll remember from the image we receive of God on Mount Sinai, there's a green hue about the throne. And green, of course, is symbolic of life. The glory of God. We have not yet experienced it in its fullest. If we were to see, if God exists, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. God exists in light. Now, we're also told that he hides himself in deep darkness, but he exists in light. He is light. And if he were to appear to us as he is, it would probably be our immediate death. And so it's only when we have been purified that we will know him as he is. And we're told that in the scriptures. We're told that this holy city will have a wall and great and high gates, 12 gates, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the east, and 3 on the west. And the gates will be have messengers or angels posted, and there will be 12 angels, and the names of the 12 tribes of Israel will be inscribed on the walls. Now, we don't know if the foundations, flip the board here, this is the word for foundation, themelius, or foundations, I forgot to put an S on the end there, and we don't know if the foundations that they speak of are between the gates or if they extend all the way around the perimeter. And it would appear that there are 12 foundations, one on top of the other. And each one is represented by a precious stone, which will be for later. But the Greek is not clear, so we just don't know. But it's quite a concept to consider. William Barclay has an interesting idea of why all these gates, okay? And the gates have the 12 tribes, and if you want lists of the 12 tribes, just you can look in Numbers 2, Ezekiel 48, and Revelation 7. And they all differ a little bit, so we're not exactly sure which tribes are going to be inscribed, but I can assure you that there will be 12 names, all right? Now, the foundations are 12, and as I said, we don't know if they're between the gates or if they extend all the way around the perimeter. Think of this. After a building is built, we don't see the foundation, it's covered up. But in effect, it's still an extension of that building. If it's not connected to that building, there's no sense in having a foundation. And our lives must be connected to the foundation, which is Christ. And in this concept of having Christ as your foundation, you will live your life in a different way, different from other people. And yes, you will be persecuted for it. There will be people who don't like it for the simple fact that you live better than they do. So these gates, these 12 gates, Barclay says the east. Now that's the direction of the rising sun. So this could indicate people who have found Christ in their youth. The north, the cold wind, those who find Christ through intellect and reasoning. Francis Schaeffer is one of those, and a great man. He was a great man, a Read his books if you can find them. The south, the warm land or the warm wind, those who find Christ through emotion. Their hearts have been moved or warmed by the Holy Spirit. And the west, the setting sun, those who find Christ later in life. Now, that's Barclay's ideas, not necessarily that of other people. But the walls and gates of the holy city stand secure. And they're built on 12 foundations, and no foundation is ever secure unless it stands upon that which is firm. That's why you build a foundation. So the only stable rock upon which to build is Christ Jesus, who is also the chief cornerstone. Now, there's a verse in Isaiah 22:4 that talks about trusting in God because he is the everlasting rock. This is the Hebrew word for rock, or one of the words. There's another word, eved, all right? And this is sur, okay? It's a cliff or a big rock. And sometimes people will think, well, Moses struck the rock and water came out. And they're thinking of, a small boulder or a tiny rock or whatever. But it's a cliff. It's a huge rock. And, it's again, if you will look at the scriptures in the original languages, you're going to get a different viewpoint. I'd like for you, in closing, to look with me into Ephesians, 2nd chapter, verse 14 through 22. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. What is that barrier? In the temple, there was a barrier, and it had signs posted. Any Gentile who goes beyond this wall, this barrier, is liable to be put to death. And it was a fearsome thing. And they watched very carefully that no Gentile ever came across that wall. But Christ has broken down that barrier. He's the breaker. He's the one who breaks out. And now we can be one people living with God.